Thank you for coming. I'm just letting you all know that we should be starting within perhaps the next 15 minutes. So relax and we are starting soon. Thank you.
Stacey, so we have a level from Reeves, and Dr. Asante did not want. Okay. All right. Super. Super. And this is being live streamed. This one. Okay. All right.
I don't. Stealing. Stole my.
I'll get it.
Oh, I already see it. No, I didn't touch it. I promise.
Oh, no, I understand.
MK.
Oh,
I don't know if I can know if I do or not.
Oh, okay. Very good. Very
So
good.
talking to a couple of your colleagues about how this collaborative of higher education institutions working on issues around I'd love to join.
Okay.
I hope you will. We have some
Absolutely.
other HBCUs, some regionals, some tunes. We just got, I can send you some more details on it, but that Michael, they just had a conversation with my colleagues about it. So I think that's brief.
Yeah, Michael Sinclair and Mark Barnes.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, you know.
We live, yeah, they're the co-chairs of the presidential task force.
We have a lot of institutions who struggle with the same issues and trying to learn from each other. So there's so much interest in higher education in this issue that we all should bring together. pays for HBCUs for the public view level that if you join HBCUs, you're listening.
Okay.
So I'm being honest.
Okay. We will follow up.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Great.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you. Testing. Good evening, everyone. We are going to go on and get started. This is being live streamed this evening as well. And of course, because of what is happening at the Murphy Fine Arts Center, we had to switch the venues. And we had a few people to go over there, and we apologize, but they have made their way over. And so I really want to take this opportunity to welcome you to the Presidential Distinguished Speaker Series. This is the second presentation that we've had in the series for 2025. We started this series about 8 years ago, and it is designed to bring some of the nation's leading and most provocative thought leaders from various disciplines and professional fields of study to Morgan State University. We believe here at Morgan that exposing our university community to a broad range of views and perspectives and angles on the myriad of challenges that we are currently facing as a nation is at the end of the day in keeping with Morgan's mission of serving as a premier public urban research university that is rooted in the great HBCU tradition. Simply put, this series is designed to promote what we call mind expansion here at Morgan. It is designed to enable us within this community to wrestle with the issues of the past, the challenges of the present, and the possibilities of tomorrow. You know, it was the best of ideas that led us to believing that one day we could actually be able to fly an airplane. It was the best of ideas that led to President Kennedy's goal of America's landing on the moon. And it was the best of ideas that has led to major healthcare reform in this country for the very first time that moved us closer to a society where at the time no one would be denied a doctor if he or she could not pay. So the dare to think critically and to challenge common thinking is really what this distinguished presidential series represents. In this series, we seek out individuals who are on the cutting edge of thought, the cutting edge of research, and the cutting edge of innovation. We seek out individuals who have the ability to really see around corners, and individuals who are able to imagine an America and to, in some instances, fight for an America that is inclusive, an America that is equitable, an America that is just, and an America that is fair to everyone. And so in doing so, we are showing our community and our students in particular what it means when we say here at Morgan that we are growing the future and leading the world. You know, the tradition of fighting, the tradition of fighting for inclusion is not new to Morgan, because some of you might not know that it was at Morgan that Dr. Martin Luther King first shared major aspects of his I Have a Dream speech before he delivered that speech at the Washington Monument. It was at Morgan that the first college sit-in movement in the nation occurred, which led to the integration of shops and restaurants here in Baltimore City. And it was one of the visionary founders of this institution in 1867, the late Reverend Samuel L. Green, who went to penitentiary for 5 years from 1857 to 1862 because as a slave, he was found in possession of a book. And so when you have as one of your founders an individual who spent 5 years in prison, and his only crime was that he possessed a book, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, you understand that we at Morgan would never, ever be about banning any book. We would never, ever be about silencing voices, because to be about that would be to dishonor Reverend Samuel Green and the visionary founders of this institution. So, as I close, just understand that we here at Morgan are not confused, that we value free expression and we value ideas and we value thoughts. We value academic freedom. We remain open to diverse points of view. And as president, I understand the importance of our students being exposed to multifaceted points of view, for I know that that exposure to those views can often lead to greatness in thought and to the greatness of possibilities. And so tonight's series is designed to shed light on a very vexing problem facing higher education in general and HBCUs in particular. It is the decrease in Black males on our campuses. You know, last semester, this was quite alarming for us here at Morgan after we had seen a slight decrease over several years. And I appointed a presidential task force to begin to look at what in the world was happening here at Morgan, because we had gone from a Black male student population in the 40s to the high 30s. And we do have the two co-chairs of that commission here with us. I'm going to ask them to stand and be recognized. Professor Michael Sinclair, Professor School of Social Work, and Professor Mark Barnes, a Professor of Geography in the Gilliam College of Liberal Arts. And so, with that said, I'm happy that you have joined us this evening. And now it is my pleasure to present two of our distinguished students and members of the President's Leadership Circle to introduce our guest speakers for the evening. After they introduce them, we'll hear from Mr. Richard. I can't believe this. Richard Reeves first. I can't believe it's Richard. And then we will hear from Professor M.K. Asante next. And so why don't I bring forward our first student, Antoine Teague. Antoine is a senior electrical engineering major, and he will introduce Richard Reeves, and he will be followed by Alexandria Horn, who will introduce Professor M.K. Asante, and she is a junior electrical engineering major. So please join me in welcoming these two amazing students.
Good afternoon, or good evening, I should say, everybody. Good evening. Okay. So I have the pleasure of telling you all a little bit about one of our speakers today. So Richard Reeves is the founding president of the American Institute for Boys and Men, the first and only national organization dedicated to objective, nonpartisan research and policy development aimed at enhancing the well-being of boys and men. He is also the author of the 2022 book of Boys and Men, Why the Modern Male is Struggling, Why It Matters, and What to Do About It. Described in the New York Times as a landmark and named a Book of the Year by The Economist, The New Yorker, and President Barack Obama. Reeves is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, where he previously served as director of the Center on Children and Families. Reeves writes for a wide range of publications, including the New York Times, The Guardian, National Affairs, The Atlantic, and The Wall Street Journal. His previous books include Dream Hoarders, released in 2017, an analysis of how America's top 20% are impeding on the social and economic mobility of other Americans, and John Stuart Mill, Victorian Firebrand, released in 2007, an intellectual biography of the British liberal philosopher and politician. In September 2017, Politico magazine named Reeves one of the top 50 thinkers in the U.S. for his work on class and inequality. A British American, Reeves was director of strategy to the UK's deputy prime minister from 2010 to 2012. His other previous roles include director of Demos, the London-based political think tank, principal policy advisor to the UK Minister for Welfare Reform, and research fellow at the Institute of Public Policy Research. He has a BA from Oxford University and a PhD from Warwick University. Reeves lives in East Tennessee and is the proud father of 3 boys. Not too long, not too long.
Good evening, everyone. I will now be introducing our second speaker. M.K. Asante is a best-selling author, award-winning filmmaker, recording artist, and distinguished professor whom the Los Angeles Times has called one of America's best storytellers. A tenured professor of creative writing and film in the Department of English and Language Arts, and a member of the Cinematic Arts and Sciences faculty of the Screenwriting and Animation program at Morgan State University, Asante is a storyteller who's drawn upon his varied life experiences and eclectic education to challenge his students to be creative by connecting the dots, being emotionally vulnerable, and remembering the high value of their stories. He is the author of 5 books, including the best-selling Buck, a memoir, and his latest volume, the critically acclaimed Nephew, a memoir in a 4-part harmony, which has won multiple awards. Among his many accomplishments outside of the world of literature, Asante founded the Emmy-nominated Wonderful Sound Studios, whose work has reached more than 250 million viewers. He also co-wrote the 2021 NBA Finals broadcast openings on ABC, directed by Academy Award-winning director Spike Lee. And he is a co-writer with Phil Collins of the official Monday Night Football anthem In the Air Tonight. Asante has lectured at Harvard, Yale, Stanford, as well as hundreds of other universities, has been featured by hundreds of media outlets, and is featured in A Changing America, a permanent video exhibit at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. Asante studied at SOAS University of London and earned a BA from Lafayette College and an MFA from the UCLA School of Theater, Film, and Television. Morgan recently honored Professor Asante with a Distinguished Achievement Award. And now, please join me in welcoming both of our speakers.
Thank you from both of us for that kind welcome. I think I speak for both of us to say that we're embarrassed by that. I'm also delighted I'm going before you, MK, because that's going to be amazing. So it's already been explained that I'm a Brit American and that I live in East Tennessee, which is true. But I also just want to get some facts straight. So I am now a proud U.S. citizen. I became a U.S. citizen here in Baltimore City in 2016. I was determined to become a citizen in time to vote in that election. And I'm very proud of this country. And one of my policies actually is that I think every high schooler should go to a naturalization ceremony. I think I don't know if anyone here has been to one. Hands up who's actually attended a naturalization ceremony, a couple. I hope you'll agree with me that they're very moving experiences. And I think if you're born a citizen, you maybe don't quite understand exactly what it means to be a citizen. And every year on the anniversary of becoming a citizen, I take out the letter from President Obama, who was president at the time, and I reread it. And in that letter, he rather beautifully sets out what he says are both the rights, but also the responsibilities of citizenship. And I do think one of the responsibilities of citizenship, as President Wilson's identified, is to engage with ideas, to engage with people we agree with, to engage with difficult facts, and to do so in a spirit of improvement. At its very best, I think this country has been one that can look forward, and that is fearless about the facts, even when those facts are uncomfortable and difficult for us to deal with. So that's the spirit I've done my work. And I've ended up working on issues around boys and men. I worked on economic inequality, as Antoine said before, social mobility, etc. That led me to this work on boys and men because I kept seeing data points. I'm going to share a few now, relatively briefly, so that we can get into the discussion that really just, to some extent, like stopped me in my tracks. And then when the pandemic hit, it just became doubly so, because when the pandemic hit, in the first year of that pandemic, the male college enrollment rate dropped 7 times more than the female college enrollment rate. And that didn't really get very much attention. It was quite hard to get people to pay attention to that because it wasn't really anybody's job to be watching male college enrollment. And so the way in which the pandemic was affecting boys and men, I didn't think was getting enough attention. And that isn't to say that we shouldn't be paying attention to the way that the pandemic was affecting women and girls. My most radical message of the evening, in case I lose you, is we can do 2 things at once. We can think 2 thoughts at once. And part of that now has to be that even as we continue to work on behalf of women and girls, including women and girls of color, black women and girls, we also do more on behalf of boys and men, especially boys and men of color, black boys and men. It is an and, not an or. But too often it's framed very, very much as a zero-sum game. That's part of my message today. So this is my topic for the evening. And this isn't working. Either this isn't working or I'm not working, or a bit of both. It was working earlier. We tested it earlier. So is there another way I can advance the slides, Stacey? Oh, you turned it off. Is that because you didn't want to see my presentation? That's because Stacey's seen my presentation before, and she's like, oh my God, no one needs to see that again. All right, here we go. This is the book that has been mentioned. Thank you very much for mentioning it. 2022. Everyone told me not to write it. Couldn't get a publisher for it. The rest is history. Simply raising the issues of boys and men was seen as a dangerous endeavor in 2021, 2022. It should not be. And it certainly shouldn't be seen as dangerous for somebody that comes at this with a very empirical and scholarly approach. But it was. But as a result of the response, I have created the American Institute for Boys and Men. It's a nonpartisan research think tank, basically, on boys and men, aibm.org. And one of our most impactful pieces of work so far was done by my colleague DJ Windsor, who is a proud graduate of a different HBCU, but still a proud HBCU graduate on HBCU enrollment, especially for black men. And that is something I think has been informed by your work here. And I want to congratulate you now, and I will again at the end, on the creation of your task force. I'm also a father. These are my 3 sons. They're all in their 20s now, 23, 24, 28, something like that. Changes all the time. Anyway, they're all old. They're all grown. They all claim to be taller than me. Part of the story is like, these are not the boys I'm most worried about, like in the social sense, right? They're coming from, in many ways, some of the most privileged circumstances you can imagine. But nonetheless, some of the questions that they're asking about how to be a man today, what to do, what not to do, the whole conversation is nonetheless part of our conversation. Around the kitchen table, it's a discussion. And so it really kind of came up, and actually and their own struggles, even though they went to good public high schools, still some struggles. And in fact, one of my sons, Bryce, on the right-hand side here, and I have his permission to share this, really struggled through high school. Only just got through high school, then found his way to university in the UK. Came out of university not exactly sure what to do, but he'd done some part-time teaching before. This is a kid that really struggled to get to high school, get himself to school. Now, he's teaching 5th grade in Baltimore City, a Highland Town elementary school. And so there's something rather beautiful about that circle, and he'd come back, and I couldn't be prouder of him. It takes time sometimes, but I've talked to him about, first of all, I joked. I did say that, when you're a teacher, you have to go. where you have to show up every day. And he is, and he's doing magnificently, and the kids love him, and he loves it. And I think it is partly because his own experience in the education system was sometimes a feeling like a square peg in a round hole, especially as a boy, that he wanted to do something circular to come back. So I don't know where his journey will lead, but I couldn't be prouder of him. And he's also the one that when I told him that the motto of our new institute, the American Institute for Boys and Men, was going to be to keep it very scholarly, very fact-based, and in fact our unofficial motto is keep it boring. He said, well, you're the man for that job, Dad. Which is praise, in a way. I said this, I'm going to keep, this is not a zero-sum game. So many people have said to me, well, if we start talking about what's really happening to boys and men, people are going to think that we want to do less for women and girls, or that we even want to turn back on women and girls, that somehow we're less committed to women and girls. It's like saying to the parent of a son and a daughter, which one are you going to care about? You're not allowed to care about both. It's as crazy as that. But our current political culture has led us to a place where to be an advocate on behalf of boys and men is to make you an anti-feminist, is to be against women, is to somehow want to roll back the tide on women. But to advocate on behalf of women and girls means you're somehow supposed to just ignore the real problems facing boys and men that I'm going to share. That's not how it needs to be. And if you don't believe me, try this guy. Governor Wes Moore, who in his State of the State address specifically called out the need to do more for boys and men. And in a subsequent interview said this, it's not a zero-sum issue. I don't see saying, okay, we need to put a greater focus on what's happening men and boys as meaning we should stop caring about women and girls. It's not in conflict with our equity goals. It is in concert with them. Right? That's exactly right as a way to frame the issue. And I'm delighted that his last cabinet meeting, took that forward and that he is deadly serious about this issue. He's one of a number of governors now who've really picked this issue up. So just in the few minutes I've got with you before we get into the conversation, I've been asked just to share a few data points. So I'm going to do this pretty quickly, just to be sure that we're all clear that there are some real issues here. And I'm going to share some data on suicide, just so that you know this is coming, and on suicide rates. And what you can see is that in the US, suicide rates have risen for all of these groups of women of different ages from 1999 to 2022. So we have rising suicide rates for all those groups of women. But here's the story for men. Same chart, same scale, also risen very, very significantly, and it's 4 times higher among men than among women. The US now loses about 40,000 men a year to suicide, which is about the same as the number of women we lose to breast cancer. Obviously, they're very different problems. I'm not comparing them in that sense, but just to give you a sense of the scale of it, it's 40,000 a year. And interestingly, up until this shows you the rise in suicide rates by age up until 2010. And you can see that most of the rise there is in the middle, which is men in their 40s and 50s. So it's middle-aged men really driving this rise in suicide rates up until 2010 through the Great Recession. But since then, something very different's happened. So now I'm going to show you what's happened since 2010, same chart. And now you can see that on the left-hand side, most of the rise is now being driven by young men. The suicide rate among men under the age of 30 in the US has risen by almost a third just since 2010. So there's a mental health crisis playing out very differently. And again, of course, there are different issues playing out for women and girls, but we are actually enduring a suicide crisis among our young men. These facts do not lie. And I think we need to pay more attention to this tragic outcome from the neglect of it. I'm going to spend a bit more time on education, given where I am. So I'm going to talk about the gender gap in college degrees. This is 4-year college degrees. Back in 1971, men were about 13 percentage points more likely to get a college degree than women, a 4-year college degree. So the gap above the line is the male advantage. 71, 72 is a good year for data reasons, but it's also a good year because it's when we passed Title IX to really try and promote women in higher education. Since then, the gap has basically closed through the 80s and has widened and widened. And so it's now slightly wider, the gender gap, than it was in the 1970s, but the other way around. So we have slightly wider than Title IX level gender gaps in higher education now, but they've reversed. Not for the same reasons, maybe not for the same consequences, but those are the facts. And I think it's taken higher education, with honorable exceptions, quite a long time to wake up to this new reality, to wake up to the fact that the gender gaps in higher education now almost always are the ones where we need to be paying more attention to men. As far as race is concerned, I'm just going to show here the share of college degrees that are going to men and women within these two racial categories, just white and black. So this is associate's degrees where you can see it's skewing female for both black and white, but much more so for black than for white. So twice as many black women getting an associate's degree as black men. Bachelor's degree is the same. Master's degree is a little bit wider gap. And doctoral degree is the same. And so you can see that there are twice as many black women getting a college degree at every level as black men, which is a wider gender gap than you see for white. So there's a gender gap for all races, but it's much wider for black students. And this is across the whole situation. I'm going to get to HBCUs in a moment. And one reason for that is because boys are behind girls in high school. This is a measure of high school GPA. This is the bottom 10% of high school students ranked by GPA. 2/3 boys. So the dark green shows you the share that's male. So there are twice as many boys as girls in that bottom 10% of the GPA distribution. This is the rest of the distribution. Look at the right-hand side, the top 10% of students by GPA, twice as many girls as boys. So at the top of that distribution, you'll see there will be 2 girls for every 1 boy at the top of the class coming out of high school. So in that sense, it's remarkable that the higher education gaps aren't even wider, given the gaps we see coming out of high school. And I'm going to go into race in a moment. Interestingly, there isn't really a big gender gap on SAT. This is the same chart, and you can see that the top 10% over here with very high SAT scores is actually 57% male. A little bit more male, but the bottom's also a bit more male too. Overall, not much of a gap on SAT. So a big gender gap on GPA, not really a gender gap on SAT. Why might that be? Shout out some thoughts. Why would you see a huge gender gap on GPA, but not really a gender gap on SAT or other standardized tests? Any ideas? Hang on. Not cool, okay. Course load. Yeah. GPA is measuring something different. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Yeah. Well, the code, it's not cool. Yeah. The co-chairs of the male task force have to hold for just a moment because they're the experts on the field. Anybody else? All right. Yes. Go for it. Lack of male teachers. Yep.
Are geared towards male-centric more than female.
SATs are male-centric. Not anymore. That was true. It's not true anymore. That was a fair criticism of the SAT. It's not true anymore. And boys do a bit better on the math section of the SAT. They don't do any better on the English section. And it's true for other standardized tests as well. I am reasonably convinced that the SAT can no longer be fairly accused of being sexist. So there's something else going on. And I think it's what you've all gotten at in different ways, which is it's courseware, it's measuring something different. Right, so the way I interpret this is girls are not smarter than boys. And just in case I need to repeat it, boys are also not smarter than girls. But girls do get their act together earlier than boys. GPA measures your ability to turn in your homework, stay on task, and girls just mature a bit earlier than boys. The average 15-year-old girl is older than the average 15-year-old boy, and we couldn't see that before because we were so busy holding the girls down and not allowing them to progress into college, telling them that college isn't for girls, that we didn't see that advantage, but now we're really seeing it. Also, not enough teachers. So the share of male teachers has dropped from 33% in the 80s to 23% today and falling every year. So we're now down to fewer than 1 in 4 of our K-12 teachers are men. We need about 500,000 to 1 million more men in our classrooms. I've done my bit with my son. That's one. What are you all doing? But then if you intersect by race, it's even clearer. We're the only people who've done the analysis this way, where we've actually looked at the gender and race makeup of the K-12 teachers and the gender and race makeup of the K-12 student population. And so what you can see is for white girls, for every 5 white girls in school, there is a white female teacher, 1 white female teacher. So 5 to 1 for white girls, right? Black, Asian, and Hispanic girls, much less well represented, as you can see. So it's 16 to 1 ratio for Hispanic girls. That's still a bit better than white boys. Even white boys are a little bit less well represented than Hispanic girls. And then these are the representation rates for the other boys. one of the great mantras of the women's movement is, you can't be it if you can't see it. I put it to you that representation matters, and that it matters by gender and by race. And so we need more men in our classrooms, period. Too few men at HBCUs. Now, we're going to and fro on different ways to measure the data. And I don't want to get stuck in that right now, but this shows you the share of black men at various HBCUs. And I'm getting different numbers to you, but I think that's just a different way of measuring it. The point is we're using IPED's data, and I did have DJ double check it before I came today. But what we're seeing is something closer to kind of 1 in 4, and it varies hugely by HBCU. But if I put them all together and tell you the real story is the change in time. So in 1976, 38% of HBCU students identified themselves as black men, 38%. By 1990, it was 32%. By 2001, it's 31%. By 2022, it's 26%. And what that means, actually, is that the share of students who identify as non-black, who identify in some other way, is now as high as the share of black men at HBCUs. The share of black women is exactly the same as it was. So on an HBCU campus now, you're as likely to see a student who doesn't identify as black as you are to see a black man. That may or may not be a problem. I get the sense you think it is a problem. And I'm going to say why I think it is a problem, particularly for black men, because HBCUs have a uniquely strong role in promoting upward mobility. This chart has a lot going on in it, so I'm just going to draw your attention to this one here. And all this chart shows you is the light green is students at all colleges, the dark green is students at HBCUs, and it's are they upwardly mobile or not? Are they economically upwardly mobile? Do they move up the economic ladder, yes or no? And as you can see, HBCUs controlling for everything you should control for hugely outperform other colleges. So HBCUs are in fact upward mobility elevators. Therefore, it matters who goes, and it matters if black men aren't going. And then very briefly, I have a couple of charts on wages and work. This came up in some of the conversations we had before. I think it's very important to look at these things by race and gender, as you can probably tell by now. And so I'm going to show you what's happened to wages for this is white men between 79 and 2020. So over that long time period, you can see that white men saw a pretty big, decent size increase in their wages. Same time period, this is what happened for white women's wages. Significant increase. Obviously, there's still a gender gap. You can still see that white men are out earning white women quite significantly, but still, that's significant change. Now I'm going to show you the change in earnings for black men over the same time period, and then for black women. Now, what this chart tells us is a lot of different things. You always have to look at race and gender. Is there a gender pay gap? Yes, absolutely. Is there a race pay gap? Absolutely. Is there also a race and gender pay gap? Yes. Look at the way white women have massively overtaken not just black women, but black men. And now black women earn about 94 cents on the dollar for black men. So there's a much smaller gender pay gap between black men and black women than there is between white men and white women. Right. So, and white women, as I say, you can see that there's a huge increase there. So I think understanding all of this is incredibly important to the conversation we're about to have. Because the solution is understand the facts and then act with task forces, with mentorship, with outreach programs, with peer groups, with intentional efforts to help boys and men, especially at HBCUs, black boys and men, not instead of helping black women and girls, but as well as helping black women and girls. Because in the end, if men are floundering, it's very hard for women to flourish, and vice versa. In the end, it's not them or us. No matter how much the politicians try and pit us against each other, in the end, we have to rise together. And that's as true of men as it is of women, and that's the spirit that's animated my work and my comments today. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. How's everybody doing? Good evening. Thank you again, Richard, for that wonderful presentation. The statistics were extremely helpful to understanding this dilemma. I wanted to, before I start, I want to just thank Dr. Wilson, President, for coordinating this speaker series. Also want to thank the task force, the professors who are here, who are co-chairs of the task force. I'd like to thank you for being here. Also like to thank Professor Mellinger, who's here, who's also very supportive of all this. When I got to thinking about this issue, which is an issue I've really been thinking about my whole life. And it really, I think, I love what you said, because this starts so much earlier than, I also want to thank some of my students, and so I just want to shout out to the students as well. And everyone here who's in attendance, and all the people live streaming. But one of the things that, I grew up in a Dr. Wilson mentioned it when he talked about education. And, in fact, my father was just talking about, your words, Dr. Wilson, in a film where you're talking about banning of books, and how that is not something we do, and it's akin to burning books. And so knowledge is power in that way. And my dad was just celebrating you. My dad is an educator. My mom was an educator. She passed away in 2021. She was a wonderful professor. In fact, I teach some of the classes now that she used to teach at Temple University in the 90s, and I would come with her to class and things like that when I was a kid. So I grew up around education. I grew up on university campus. But I also grew up in an environment that you had multiple influences happening at the same time. I wrote about my educational experience. And before I get into kind of the college level, I want to talk a little bit about that introductory level and where it starts. I'm going to read 3 different passages for you. And each of these passages is from my memoir, Buck. And in this memoir, which I wrote this memoir, and what it does is it tells the story of, a young buck, if y'all know what that is, young buck, buck wild, buck shots, buck town, slave buck, black buck, make buck, buck now. It tells this story about me growing up in Philly, and a very interesting childhood with a lot of different influences. And I went to a lot of different schools growing up. And although that was not something my parents liked, getting kicked out of schools. But although they didn't like that, it taught me a lot. And I got a chance to see and witness different educational institutions. And so in Buck, which is written, I wrote Buck in the first person present tense. So this book takes place when I'm a kid in the 90s. And it's written from that perspective. So I'm going to read you some passages from the different educational institutions that I went to. One was a private school. It was called Friends Select. And in this chapter, it's called Foes. Like friends and foes. And then there's another chapter, the public school chapter, that's called The Pipeline. And I'm going to read a little bit from there. And then we're going to end the reading on a chapter where really what the book is ultimately about is the chapter where it clicks, right? And something clicked. There's something about that last educational experience that's much different than the first and second. I'm going to highlight that. And I think it really connects with all the stats and information we've been learning. So the first educational experience was Friends. And so I'm going to read just a little bit from this section. Four, friends or foes? Remember, I'm 14, just a little disclaimer. My school colors are piss yellow and shit brown. The building is the color of shit too. Like someone took a big monster dump and smeared it all over. That's what going to school, that's what going to a friend's school is like, eating your own shit. And inside Principal Roach's office, where I am now, it's even worse than eating your own shit. It's eating someone else's. Roach limps around all day yelling at me about rules. He's got that rare type of limp that once you meet him, you feel like he deserves it. I don't even know why I'm here or what I did. My teacher just sent me here as soon as I walked in. Roach's office is small and messy. Greasy thumbprints smudge all his scattered papers like drunk watermarks. I'm sitting here waiting for him, thinking about how I'd rather scrape the blood off the sidewalk than be here waiting for him. Second. One second here. Okay. I'll talk a little bit about why my parents sent me to this school. My parents sent me to this school because it's supposed to be better than my neighborhood school in Alney and most of my boys go to. Better how? All we do is memorize stuff and spit it back like robots. It's called friends, but it should be called foes. They act one way to your face, but behind closed doors, it's another story. Like how someone wrote nigger inside my locker when I was suspended. I have no idea who did it because nobody asked the part. I write back in my locker, say it to my face. It's like my pops always says about racists from the North versus racism from the South. My pop says, I like my racism the way I like my whiskey, straight up. Even though he doesn't really drink, down South, they just come right out and call you a nigga, he says. Tell you to your face, we don't want nothing to do with you. And at least you know where you stand and where they stand. But up North, his blood boils when he talks about racism. Up here, they pretend to be liberal, but are some of the most racist white folks you've ever met in your life. Word is bond. I like how Pops is always standing up for black people, how we don't take no shit. So that's from the chapter Friends or Foes. So now we're gonna jump to, I got kicked out of that school. Funny story, I ran into them recently and they asked me to come back to the school and speak and the whole thing. Full circle. and so okay, so now we're gonna jump to the chapter that's called The Pipeline. We pour into Fells High like syrup, steady and slow. This school looks just like jail. I wonder why mad schools look like jails. Or do jails look like schools? The jail my brother's in is actually nicer than this school. If schools look like prisons and prisons look like schools, will we act like students or prisoners? Police roam the hallway whirling nightsticks like band directors. The windows are tinted with bars. No sunlight like a casino. Shit, and you never went in here either. At my old school, Friends, the teachers always fuck with me. At Fells, the teachers don't know who the fuck I am. Overcrowded like Amistad. Fells is the opposite of my old school. Friends, foes. They say Foes is one of the best schools in the city. They say Fells is one of the worst. Foes, private, Fells, pub. Foes, mostly white, Fells, mostly black. Foes kids' parents got tuition money. Fells kids' parents ain't even got lunch money. The metal detector line is long like the line to get into club dances on Saturday nights. A bucket full of lighters, nail files, pocket knives, everything beeping, police digging through bags like moles. It takes forever to get in. The hallway is a fashion show. People won't even come to school if they don't have something fresh to throw on. The bell goes off like we're in some factory somewhere. Here. First period. I think this is homeroom. The teacher never shows up, so no one really knows. Girls just sit and do their makeup and hair. I dip in and out the pissy hallways. Take your hat off, pull your pants up. Where's your hall pass? The guards yell every 15 minutes like a record. I go through each period. I'm gonna skip some of these periods, but I think you kind of get the point. Some of the periods, right? You get the point? Yeah. It's not a whole lot of learning going on. So I'm gonna jump to the end. here, the end of like I said, I go through all the different periods of class. So we end at fifth period. Fifth lunch is like slaughterhouse, the killing fields, gang fights, knives, all-out food fights, even race wars. Cambos versus blacks, Puerto Rocks versus blacks, whites versus everybody. Me, I'm cool with all the races. My favorite color is green. I don't know what class I have after fifth period because I never go and I never stay longer than last lunch. There's really no point. There's no learning going on at Fells, just rules and yelling and chaos and screaming correctional officer teachers. I feel like I can learn more outside of these dead school walls. Every day, I dip out the back door of the cafeteria, hop the metal fence, and speed away from the school that looks like jail, feels like jail. They do what they always do, the only thing they know how to do, what jails do: punish me with detention and probation like the judge did my brother. So that's the pipeline, okay? And my brother, just a little backstory, throughout this book, my brother's incarcerated. And so my family is dealing with my brother's incarceration. He's my older brother. He's a little bit older than me. And he's also someone who I was probably trying to emulate when I was young. In fact, I was trying to emulate. He's 6'6", and so he's a tall guy. And you might be able to tell I'm not 6'6". But when I would follow him everywhere as a child, and he in our house, he would walk. When he would walk in the doorways, he has to go like, he has to duck. And so, just imagine me as a little kid. I would always duck when I walk under the doorway, and he actually needed to duck. But for me, it was just this emulation of my brother. I wanted to be like him in every way. He was the coolest. He's so smart and fun and exciting, and he was into all types of stuff. Like, so that's that ultimately got him in trouble, and that's part of the journey. So I wanted to give you that backstory, and then I'm gonna go jump to the last section that I wanted to read from this book. And there's two sections that are connected, and I want to just share it with you. So just so you kind of, because we're jumping like three major parts of this book. Okay, so now I'm at the final school. This is the place where, like, it's an alternative school. If you don't make it here, you're not making it. This is a lot of kids with a lot of different issues at this school, and I want to share something that happened in this environment. Pull something out to write on. I'm sorry. Pull out something to write on, something to write with, a pen, pencil, bloody fingernail. Everybody inks up with something to write with. I don't have anything to write with, no paper either. I can't even remember the last time I did schoolwork. Stacy puts a blank page in front of me, pen on top of it like a paperweight. Okay, class, write. Everyone in the class starts scribbling fast like reporters at a press conference. I just sit there, confused. She makes her way over. Write, she says, hawking over me. Write what? I look around at everyone writing, lost in their own little worlds. I wonder what they writing. Write what? Anything you want, she says. Anything I want. I want to make sure I heard that right. Anything, she says. I know this trick. She's bullshitting. Teachers always tell you to express yourself. Then when you really do, you get in trouble. So I write, fuck school, and wait for her to flip. She's probably going to lose it, kick me out. Okay, she laughs. Now keep writing. Keep going. Since when? See, she told me to keep going, and she didn't realize that I didn't have anything else. That was all I wanted to say. That was all I had. But when she told me to keep going, all of a sudden, it was like a challenge. What else do you have to say besides that? Like, once we get that out the way, then what, right? So I turn the page over. It's blank again. The blank page is the starter pistol that fires and triggers my mind to sprint. What will I write? What will I say? Will I say what I write what I say? Something funny, something serious, maybe something about my family, maybe something about Amir. It's my best friend who died. Ryan, how will I start? Whose story will I tell? My story? Something made up? What about a story about a boy from Philly? A lost boy who wants to find himself but doesn't know where to look, who wants to tell his story but doesn't know where to begin or end, who searches anyway and discovers something about himself, about the world. I stare at the blank page, an ocean of white alive with possibilities. I hear myself take a breath, then exhale like I just rose from underwater. It's like I'm at the free throw line again, foul shots, like the game is on the line again. I remember something my dad told me: shoot to make it. My hand is shaking because he used to always say, don't just shoot the ball, shoot to make it. It's a big difference. You got to shoot with intention. He got that from John Wooden, UCLA guy when he was at UCLA. My hand's shaking now, trembling like it's freezing. Then it hits me, a silence louder than all the music I've ever heard in my life. All the light in the world in one beam before me. I grip the pen and something shoots down my spine, sits me straight up. The pen feels heavy like it's made of stone. At exactly which point do you start to realize that life without knowledge is death in disguise? I stare deep into the blank page and see myself. I feel something I've never felt before. Purpose. I don't know what my exact purpose is yet, but I know it has something to do with this pen and this blank page. Shit, I am a blank page. Holding the pen this way, snug and firm in my fists, makes me feel like I can write my future, like I can spell out my destiny in sharp strokes. And so that was the beginning of something very profound for me. That was really my discovery of creative writing. And that led to something because, again, my dad, he told me, shoot to make it. But when I told my dad about writing, one of the things he said is, in order to be a good writer, you have to be a good reader. And so I began to read voraciously, and I had an epiphany that's really connected to the founder of Morgan State University. And Dr. Wilson just mentioned it. And so I'll read this kind of epiphany that I had, when I was 17. Now I see why reading was illegal for Black people during slavery. I discovered that I think in words. The more words I know, the more things I can think about. My vocab and thoughts grow together like the stem and petals of a flower. Reading was illegal because if you limit someone's vocab, you limit their thoughts. They can't even think of freedom because they don't have the language to. And so I then talk about, language and my experience with it. And so those are three different experiences that I faced growing up, and I'm going to come back to them when I talk about retention. That word retention is very significant to me. I fell in love with that word when my parents talked about African cultural retentions, the things we do, call and response, some of the language we have, some of the customs we have that, as they say in Ghana, even in a foreign habitat, a snail never loses its shell, right? Meaning that there's so much that is retained. And so retainment, retention becomes about what we keep. What are we able to keep? And that's very important. When I got to college, this experience, my educational experience was different, obviously, than those three experiences in high school. I wrote about that experience as well. That's a theme, as you can see in my life, is, when I'm going through a particular experience, I tend to write about it. And when I first got to college, I wrote about it immediately. I wrote about what I was feeling, and I wrote it in a poem called Two Sets of Notes, and I want to share some of it with you now. I said, I find myself feeling as if I'm touching the ground and the ceiling. In schools that don't engage in healing, nah, they simply open the wounds and entrap me in rooms where I am consumed by hypocrisy. But hold up, even Greek philosophers weren't the authors of their own philosophies. And the statues on campus be watching me. Washington, Jefferson, Williams clocking me as if to say my time's up. But I don't run laps on track. See, I run laps around the scholars of tomorrow because their new schools of thought are merely our histories borrowed, and they labeled me militant and black national radical. They tried to put my learning process on sabbatical. But I don't apologize. I spit truth into those eyes that have been infected by those lies. Then they try to get me to see they point of view from a cat that looked like me. But he don't walk like me, talk like me, or act like me. And homie started running when I asked if he was black like me, mastering their thoughts and forgetting our own. And you wonder why we always feel alone. From the media to academia, hanging brothers like coats. That's why in they schools, I always take 2 sets of notes. One set to ace the test, and the other set I call the truth. And when I find historical contradictions, I use that first set as proof. Proof that black youth's minds are being polluted, convoluted, diluted, not culturally rooted in anything except the Western massacre. And when we was in school, we were scared of Africa. We viewed our mother's land through the eyes of racists like David Hume and Immanuel Kant, not knowing Immanuel Kant tell me shit about a land he's never seen, a land rich with history, beautiful kings and queens. But they had us believe otherwise. The history they taught was built on high-rise lies. They didn't teach me that the pyramids were completed before Greece and Rome were conceptualized. Then they tried to claim the Egyptians' race was a mystery. And I used to believe them till I went to Egypt and read Herodotus' book 2 of the histories. Can it be any clearer? Black students, brown students, white students, look in the mirror. You're a reflection of divinity. Don't let them fool you with selective memory. Walk high, listen to the elders who spoke. Black students, brown students, all students, always take 2 sets of notes. So 2 sets of notes came out of the experience of, and I love what Richard said about 2 things can be true at the same time. And I think there are multiple things happening here that are affecting retention. I think there's, on the one hand, there's sometimes this cultural component where there's this disconnect between what you're learning and how it connects with you, right? We see the attack on history. We see the attack on, liberation. we see that attack. And so when there's that disconnect, I think that causes people to reject school. I think there's something else going on as well. And it's something that I've noticed in my own classroom. And you talked about it as well, Richard. And that is the post-COVID mental health crisis that we've been undergoing. My mom taught artistic classes, creative classes, and I try to bring that creativity into the classroom because I know that is one way to keep students. That is one way to keep people engaged is creativity, and not just creating art or making literature, but being creative in how we approach education. When I think about what do we retain, what do we keep, that's very important. I think about not only just Africa, even here in America, the African women who were enslaved and who made quilts. I want to hear that breaking news later. But who made quilts? We have so much to learn from them, and I like to take a lot of direction from what I take from the quilts. I think we can use it in education. These quilts that African American women made during slavery were resourceful. That was the first thing that you notice about these quilts. Incredibly resourceful. They didn't have one big piece of cloth. So what did they do? They maximized the maximization of minimal resources, right? They took made something out of nothing, some people call it, right? Spun wax into gold. So they were able to take these limited resources and maximize them. That's the first thing that we have to do as educators. That's the first thing we have to do as a university. That's the first thing we have to do as teachers, is utilize our resources. And we also have to teach students that they have resources. Because one of the things that happens is, I've been on so many committees, on so many panels, on so many boards, where I'm wondering, how come there's so few applicants? People don't know. They don't know that they have that resource. They don't know that there's free money for them. For example, I was on a board here in Baltimore, and we had all this free money that we couldn't even give people because people didn't apply for it. They didn't know about it. And so I think part of it is making sure students know about the resources they have. But I'm talking about the African-American women who made these quilts and were resourceful. What else were they? They were, they practiced aesthetics to the highest standard. So even though they didn't have a lot, look at the aesthetics that these women used who were enslaved. Beautiful, vivid, vibrant quilts, even with limited resources. So we have to always be aware of presentation, aesthetics, how we present our culture, how we present our art, how we present education to make it attractive to others. It's important because we live in such a visual culture. So I'm talking about the things that I gleaned from these African-American women who made these quilts and how we can apply it to keeping Black males in the classroom. The third thing about what these African-American women did with these quilts that's so important is these quilts were practical. They weren't just made to hang on a wall. Quilts keep you warm. Where's the brother from Arizona? The brother just came from Arizona, the new computer whiz, and who's doing all the IT here. And we were just talking about how he came from Arizona. He didn't have a coat. Well, the sisters would, they would have hooked you up with a quilt, and you would have been all right. But that's the thing. The quilt keeps you warm. It is a piece of practical art, right? The other thing and the last thing, and I think that's really important, that practicality, meaning how does this connect education in the classroom with what I'm going through? For example, the first story that I read to you when I was at Foes it's really interesting because I was going through so much at Foes. My brother was incarcerated. My mom had been admitted to a was in a psychiatric hospital. Had a lot of issues at home and around me. Violence around me. Yet the school didn't know any of that. They didn't ask, they didn't know, they didn't observe. It was done. So I think it's important for that practicality is we have to be able to understand how education is going to improve our lives, improve the lives of our family. And educators have to be observant about students. What's up, man? Hey, you want to, I've had so many experiences where I'm talking to students after class and they're telling me what's really going on, right? Because, it's one thing in class, but after class, what's up, man? And then that's when you hear the incredible amount of things that students have going on, and they're trying to navigate and manage it all. And so I think that's important, that practical important. And the last thing that the quilts do, that these African-American women made during enslavement, many of you know about, I'm sure you know about, the quilts had these symbols in them, right? These symbols were, I talked about African retentions earlier. There's a word called hippie, H-I-P-I, it's where the word hip comes from. It's a Wolof word, hippie, H-I-P-I. It means to open one's eye and see. It's a term of enlightenment. So if you're a hippie, you get it, right? And so these African-American women who made these quilts, they embedded messages in the quilts, symbols, that if you were hippie, right, which means if you were, I guess, kind of like, your eyes were open. If your eyes were open, right? Then you would know that this is not just a quilt. This is not just to keep me warm. This is not just to be beautiful. This is not just something that's resourceful. This piece of art is emancipatory. It could actually get me free. It could actually get my family free. It could actually, so that's what I think as educators and as an educator, I try to focus on how can we make this education emancipatory? How can this help? How can what we're learning help get you free? How can it help free others? Because that's what it did for me. When I talk about writing and creative, it's freedom. It's what allowed me to be free. It's what allowed me to feel freedom. It's what allowed me to not just wrote memorization, but allowed me to tell a story, tell my narrative. So I think that should be a focus of how we educate, is bringing creativity into the classroom, encouraging students to be creative, observing students, asking them how they're doing. The other day I had a class and it was one of the deepest classes I ever had. We had this really vulnerable discussion, and students were saying things and talking about things that were very deep and personal to them. And I felt the need to constantly reiterate to them that how brave they are for sharing those stories that they're sharing. They're talking about things that it's very difficult for people to talk about, and I thought, you're so brave and you need to know that, and that this is a safe space. And I know that some of the students that I've had that have struggled, when I create that safe space, when I encourage that safe space, they come back semester after semester, they hang in there. I see that so many of our students need someone to talk to, someone who's going to listen to them, and they need to learn how to be self-advocates for themselves. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you, Richard.
Great. Is this microphone on? Let me know when it is. I think it is now. Well, this is wonderful. Let me start with you, Richard. Is this another example of American exceptionalism? Or are you seeing similar disparities in your home country, for example, or anywhere else?
Thank you. Some of it's the same, and actually I'm about to launch a similar initiative in the UK. So the education gaps are very similar and actually they're widest in places like Scandinavia. The biggest gender gaps are in Scandinavia.
Why there?
I think because there's been such a huge push in places like Sweden and Denmark and Finland on women's education that the women there have just not just overtaken the men, but like left them behind. There's like a 20-point gap in higher education in Scandinavia. The difference in the US is very relevant to this conversation, which is that if you look in the UK at like college going, the students who are least likely to go to college in the UK, where I'm from, are white working class boys. All right. Actually, black boys and girls in the UK are a bit more likely to go to college and to complete college in the UK. They largely live in London. And so there's a race and class both matter in both countries, but the US, I think, is pretty unique in the specific racial challenges, and specifically for black students, for reasons that I think we've just heard a lot about. Beautiful stories, by the way, thank you. And so there's just I think it's very important when you look at the data in the US and you look at gender specifically, the specific intersection of race and gender and what that means for black men. And I'm just talking about the data at this point. Obviously, I'm speaking about this as a white British guy, right? Is you can't ignore it. You just cannot ignore the data on what happens to black boys in schools and in the criminal justice system and to black men in the labor market. And that appears to be almost uniquely American experience.
I just wanted to ask you a follow-up question. Am I on? Okay, here we go. I wanted to ask you a follow-up question because what you said, you mentioned the labor market, and when you said that white working class males are the least likely, I was curious, is that connected to them possibly getting paid more entry level without college education jobs?
Right. No.
Okay.
That's the thing. It used to be true, right? I think that like lots of people have been sold lots of myths. And I think that one of the most difficult things for people to realize now is that even for white working class men, the idea that they're just going to walk into a good job without education, the way that maybe their fathers were able to. To be clear, partly because there were kind of sexist and racist constraints around those jobs, right? That is just not true anymore. And if you want to find the most downwardly mobile people in the US now, it is white men from low-income backgrounds. Now, that does not mean that there isn't still a huge race gap. I'm not saying that, that
Are
their
you
lines
talking
are-
about numbers?
I'm talking about,
Like in terms of
Right.
just quantity?
if the question is, are you better off than your father was? For obvious reasons, for even today, for black men, even though you saw my data, right, there's still a decent chance they'll be better off than their father was because of the challenges that their father faced. Whereas for white men now, if they're low income, they're worse off than their father was on pretty much every measure, economically, socially, etc. So the line is going really sharply down for that group. That's where class does play in the US, but it doesn't take away from the fact that race, and to be clear, when I say race, I'm specifically talking about black students and students especially. I'm not really talking about students of color. That's not even a term that I really like very much, although we use it sometimes. I'm talking very specifically about the black experience that you just spoke about.
You started by saying that when you began doing this research, you were warned off of this as a dangerous endeavor. Why? What made it dangerous?
When the book came out, I did a panel like this, and the first question was, when did you first start hating women? And it was meant as a way to open up the conversation, and it did. But it was precisely because, and maybe especially if you come from my sort of background, there's just this immediate suspicion that if you are advocating for paying more attention to boys and men, that somewhere along the line you're going to start saying, we need to go back on women. Right, that there is going to be, in order to be pro-male, at some level you've probably got to be anti-female. Right? I just think that's so untrue. And I think it actually means that men who are not anti-female, and I feel very strongly in my previous work that I haven't, to say we can do both things at once. If we allow only the men who are actually, there are a bunch of men now who think that the way to restore men is to turn back the clock on women. Right? We just need women to go back to the kitchen, and then the men will be okay again, right? But if that's the only way you're allowed to talk about boys and men is with that reactionary agenda, then no wonder the only people talking about it are reactionaries.
See, I sort of thought you were going to say it was dangerous because it somehow exposes these angry white males who are frustrated because they aren't advancing anymore. And that sort of defeats the notion of white supremacy somehow. They are vulnerable, they are weak, they are losers.
Yeah, that is a challenge with the work, for sure. But, and I'd be interested to know how people respond to this. You just had this great line, I spit truth in the eye. What was the end? I spit truth in the eye of the something lie.
Yeah, I spit truth into the. See, you put me on the spot, man.
Well, it's your poem. It's your poem.
See, I can do the poem, but then when you
Okay.
ask for a specific, I gotta go.
You
to
said
the-
like in the poem.
I spit truth into the eyes of. I got it. I spit truth into the eyes of those who have been infected by those lies.
Yes. Okay. That's it. Right. And so now, I'm going to say
Metaphorically, I spit.
I
into the
understand.
eye.
Yeah. So, but actually, I'm never going to be able to say that because of the way that I have to work. But I'm going to be thinking it. I'm going to have your words because here's the thing. There are people who say that if you point out some of these issues, some of which are affecting white men, especially working class white men. I mean, I live in East Tennessee. The male labor force participation where I live is 45%. Right. The deaths from drug overdoses, especially among working class white men, are very high where I live, right? So if you start drawing attention to that, people can think, well, you're somehow giving ammunition to the white supremacists, to the reactionaries. I take the view, and people do not agree with me about this, that if something's true, it's better to acknowledge it and own it rather than look away. Because if it's true that, for example, the male suicide rate is 4 times higher than it is for women, someone's going to notice that. And just ignoring it and hoping that no one notices it on the internet is not a good strategy. Instead, we end up just then creating a vacuum that actually helps the reactionaries.
So we've been ignoring this for 4 decades or so, it looks like, since about the 80s.
Maybe ignoring it is too strong, but I think that mainstream institutions, think tanks, universities, the media, have just really struggled with this zero-sum problem. They've really struggled, I think, to get past this idea that somehow talking about the problems of boys and men either makes you anti-women or, as you just suggested, gives succor to the reactionaries. And so I've had arguments with people in government who will not acknowledge the suicide gap between men and women. So to this day, that gender gap in suicide is not acknowledged by the federal government as a suicide disparity. And what they've said to me privately is, well, all those right-wing men out there on the internet are going around saying the government doesn't care about male suicide, which is 4 times higher than for women. So we don't want to publish the fact that it's 4 times higher for men than for women, because then they'll be right. We'll make it sound like those reactionaries are right. To which I say, spitting truth in the eye, they are right. You don't make them wrong, you just make them heroes. Because suddenly they're the ones telling the truth on the internet, and you're the ones hoping no one notices. And that doesn't work. I think we've tried, I think the last few years have shown us that doesn't work.
Yeah, and like you said, well, 2 things. Tupac said that, I'm not anti-white, I'm pro-black. That's what Tupac said, Tupac Shakur. They was asking him, what do you... So I just wanted to give you may use that somewhere.
That one I can use.
Yeah, you can use that.
You want him to rap like
And then the
Tupac.
other thing is what you're saying about the facts and about what's happening with white male, again, goes back to what you said about multiple things can be true at the same time. So just because we acknowledge that, things are, declining for white men in certain capacities or in a lot of these capacities, it doesn't take away from the fangs of white supremacy or the fact that, black people have been suffering in this country for, since we've been here.
Well, you saw the wage chart,
Exactly,
right? Two
yes.
things can be true at once.
Exactly.
And also, I think that the trend can matter and the level.
Yeah.
Right. So when we look at a gap, like a gender gap in pay or something, like you're looking at the current level, but I think trend really matters as well, right? And so if you've got if a gap is narrowing, it may not be narrowing quickly enough, but that's a good sign, right? If a gap's widening, that's very different. That's why I showed that thing by earnings as well, because the trend for white women's earnings is very, very rapidly up. Does that mean they're earning as much as white men? No, but the trend really matters.
Why are white men still earning more?
More than white women?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't take time out of the labor market to care for children. So the pay gap is really a parenting gap now. What's interesting is you can see that in same-sex couples as well, most of whom are females. But if you look at same-sex couples that have kids, the woman that stays home to look after the kid there's about as big a gender pay gap between her and her wife or her partner as there is between straight couples. So we now know pretty clearly that the pay gap is really a parenting gap.
Mm-hmm. MK, you were telling us about your perception at various stages in these schools. What could have been done to set you on a course even earlier towards college, when you were in the kind of school, the physical environment you were in, with the curriculum that probably wasn't connecting with you either? What could have happened there to set you on a course towards college?
Yeah, there's a couple things. Thank you so much. I think there's a couple things. I think one is that first school, there was so much going on at home, and it was like not acknowledged and not recognized. And so that was causing a lot of acting out and a lot of, behavior that was getting me in trouble. And so I think that's why I've talked about teachers being observant and talking to students, not just about the material, but about how they're doing and what's going on at home, and, just getting more information in that way. I would say in the second environment, they tried, there were people that tried to come talk to me. And this is what I want to encourage all the mentors and the people who mentor men. And and young boys. When I was young, they sent some really nice brothers to come talk to me. These brothers were nice, you know, they were respectful. And I feel so bad now looking back at it because I was so rude and I was so disrespectful and I knew everything and I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't want to hear it. And I had such a bad attitude. And literally these people would come to my school and they would have, nice suit on and they would say, hey, I want to talk to you, help you out. And I would just totally blow them off, totally disrespect, just not be. And I remember thinking and seeing their faces and remember them thinking, or remember me thinking, they think, like you could see the fact that they thought it was all lost. Like this kid he doesn't care. Like I would say, I would curse. I still do. But I would say, I don't give a, all these things. And so they would say, oh man, this guy. And I remember my parents struggling with me, but I also remember something else. And this is what I want to tell everyone. It's a positive message. Everything they were saying, I used to act like I wasn't listening. I would literally be, the mentor person would be sitting there telling me, I'm like making faces, not listening to that. I'm just doing all the motions that you can imagine a teenage black boy from Philly doing, right? In this environment. And just like I said, I'm not listening. I don't care what you say. I'm not, I know I'm a man, whatever. I'm the man, all this dumb stuff. So I say that to say, then it clicked. I remember it was like all of the things that were ever said by all of these different people started to make sense. Like, those aren't your friends. And, focus on this. And all of these, whatever it was, all this advice, wisdom from the elders that I had pretended I wasn't even listening to. I'm not even paying attention to you. But I'm so glad that they said those things because it did finally penetrate. And then when some of the people, I was able to apologize and thank them, and they were able to see me many years later. And but I guess my thought to all of the people who work with young people is don't give up. Don't, even if they are acting like, trust me, they're listening. It's an act. And I was really good at it when I was young. And, well,
I'm glad to know that because I've been that one going, what can I do to get
exactly.
through?
You keep saying it. You keep repeating the message.
But unfortunately, some kids, when it clicks, well, they don't get a chance.
Sometimes it's too late.
For
I know,
time to let
it
click.
I know the luxury that we don't have.
So what do we do about that?
Yeah, I mean, I used to think that there was like the early years really mattered, right? And if you didn't give it by 5 or 6, and then I had kids, and they're on their 20s now. And I love this point. It's like saturation, right? It's not usually flashes of insight. It's just over time. And I love your point about mentoring, because one of the things I've discovered is that there's a real shortage of male mentors in the US right now. Like big brothers, big sisters, the waiting list for boys is 4 times longer than for girls because they just don't have any men showing up to be bigs now. So big brothers, big sisters is becoming big sisters by default. And it's not because there aren't boys who need it. It's because there aren't men signing up for it. And so I just want to underline this point about like it takes a long time. There's a famous phrase, it takes a village. I think that's true, but I think some of the villages have to be men. And showing up. So I think mentoring, peer coaching, and patience. This idea of retention is really going to stick with me because it's a very technical term in higher education, as many of you will know. Like, what's your retention rate? Right? What's your 4-year retention rate? And I love the way that you've thought about that, and just more in terms of what are you retaining as the student, rather than just are you retaining the student. And I don't know where that leads, but I think that's a really challenging thought. There's this nice line that we should worry less about college-ready students and try and worry more about student-ready colleges. And I think part of that is this sense of like, what are you retaining? How are we bringing you in? And that's because you saw the data. I just think that I'm not saying it's easy to do. Like, I'm not doing it for a living. It's easy for me to say this, but I think that that relational aspect you talked about your journey. I think that's the magic.
I think we wanted to take some questions from the audience. Are people coming to the microphone? There's no microphone there. So anyone who wants to ask questions, please make your way there. Now, we're talking about the need for more focus on males, and in this case, we're talking about Black males, but this is coming at a time when those in power who control the purse are specifically saying they don't want to do anything that's going to benefit people of color. So DEI, in the words of the president. So how do we develop this movement to work on behalf of males, young boys and men, at a time when some of those federal resources probably won't be available?
Well, I'll make an observation first and maybe a suggestion. The observation is that because the federal moves on DEI have been mostly around race, specifically focused on DEI through that racial lens rather than on gender, it's weirdly changed the conversation that I'm having with some groups. And so before the change in administration, there would be some groups who are like working with mostly black men, but they would really focus on the black side of it rather than the men's side of it. They'd say, like, we're working with black students, and then they'd say, but it's mostly men. Because actually the challenge was doing stuff for men.
Yeah.
Now that there's been this challenge against the racial stuff, a lot of them are saying, we're doing work with men who are mostly black. So it's really interesting how part of it's just the way you think about it. I actually think that the work for men is ongoing. And I will say one thing, which is a fair criticism of some of the DEI programs was that they weren't driven enough by the data. I did go to some colleges where they would say that the biggest problem they had was with men, sometimes certain groups of men, and then I'd go to their DEI program people and say, so where's your DEI program for that group of men? And they wouldn't have one. But I was like, well, why wouldn't you have that? Why isn't that a DEI challenge? They're like, no, we have a DEI program for women and we have a DEI program for all right. And so unfortunately, because the DEI programs I don't think were based strong enough on the data, they didn't do enough stuff on men. And I think that made them vulnerable to the claim that they were being driven by ideology rather than by data. And I think that in the end, that made them vulnerable. I'm not defending what's happening, but I am saying that it would have been easier to defend against some of these attacks on DEI if actually these colleges and universities had actually looked harder at their own data and built their DEI programs around that.
Which
beginning to do
ultimately
that?
wouldn't have mattered.
With this group.
It would have made it harder. Well, I'll give you one example, which is that like there's a regional college, and they told me in Wisconsin, they told me that their biggest challenge was with low-income white men from rural areas. That was their biggest enrollment and completion challenge. That didn't mean they're also struggling with a lot of their black men, etc. But
Where was this at?
It was in Wisconsin.
Okay.
So, but their single biggest problem was with this group of white men. And then, so I said, so do you have any programming around that group? The answer was no. And so when Republican legislators came along to challenge the DEI program, imagine if they could have said, does that mean you want to shut down this program we've got for rural white men in your district? That would have been harder to shut. I'm not saying, maybe you're right, but that would have been a more difficult conversation if they'd been able to say we have a program for rural white men.
Are you coming up for a question, Dr. Sinclair? Okay. Anyone else? Make your way to the microphone.
I have two quick questions. One, I wanted to see that slide that you had regarding the HBCUs. You have to blame it on my age. I was back there and I was like, I couldn't see, which HBCUs were doing well in terms of black male enrollment as opposed to others.
Yeah,
Ben,
well,
are you gonna get that one?
or you can just go to aibm.org if you want and look at it. It's in the HBCU piece that DJ Windsor wrote. So it's all in there. As I say, there's some discussion about how the data is collected, but.
And I like what you said, just to repeat your words, you can't be what you can't see. And I think it's important for representation. How do we frame that at a university in a sense that we need to get more Black male professors to be there to engage, because something that you said earlier on really is a part of my research right now in terms of women are just ready a lot earlier. What we have is a lot of Black men who are now thinking about getting to college, but they're thinking about it further on down the line. They're not typical age, traditional age of 18 to 22. They may be starting their degree when they're 27, and they're ending a lot earlier. They're taking a lot of time to get through colleges, and finances tend to be one of the things that keeps coming up in the research, that we need to be able to have programs that support Black male, subsidizing their education. So, I mean, I know that's a lot of stuff that I'm throwing at you, but while I have you here, I'm going to pick your brain.
I'll be very brief. I think it is true that most of what's happening in higher education can be predicted by what's happening in K-12. That is not to let higher education off the hook, right? You know how in education, the people in college say, well, it's the high schools. The people in high school say, no, it's the middle schools. The people in middle schools, no, it's the elementary schools. And then they say, no, it's kindergarten. And then they say, oh, it's the parents. So it's like, in the end, everyone just pushes it, right? I think it's nobody's fault, but it's everybody's responsibility, right, to do it. So I think universities and colleges like this one have a huge responsibility to do a better job of enrolling and graduating Black men, right, as your task force has set out to do. And then as for the pipeline for Black male faculty, I don't have a great answer on that, honestly, except to say that we have been unbelievably intentional about getting, for example, more women into STEM fields, teaching, and we've heard from one earlier. I think that's been amazing, but it didn't happen by accident. And I think we need similar efforts now on behalf of men, not instead of the ones that we have for women in STEM, but as well as them.
Absolutely. I agree with that. And one thing I'll mention also is that we're talking about Black male teachers. One thing I didn't mention is that last school that I went to, that alternative school, that was the first time I'd ever had a Black male teacher. Not the creative writing teacher, but another teacher who was a Black man. And a funny story, I tried to get tough with him, and he got tough back. And I learned. I said, oh, okay. And it was a very interesting experience because, he was from D.C., by the way. He was from D.C., And he said, yeah, what's up, young buck? He said, yeah, I'm with it too. What do you want to do? I said, I don't want no problems, and I was a good boy after that. So, sometimes there is something about another man checking you in that capacity that really, hey, I got it. I'm good,
You know the colloquial term, real recognize real?
RRR. Triple R, baby. Absolutely.
Greetings. My name is Amani and Carey, theater arts major, screenwriter, and writer for Baltimore, Maryland. So,
Good evening.
good evening, Professor Asante. So, I have questions for Mr. Reeves. Based on what you discussed, you pointed out you were, in your own terms, focusing on men besides women, and I gotta ask, what do you mean by that in your own experience?
Sorry, what do you mean? Can I ask you to say a little bit more?
Let's see. Of you were explaining on how you were focusing on more on Black men and besides women. What were you mean by that? Or
Do you want me to do that first, or do you want to do your other question first?
let's see. And not just that, but you were also dealing with the racial discrimination, because as a white man and Black man, because we all know how racial discrimination goes, and it really hits hard. It's a really ugly way, especially for the question that I'm going to ask Mr. Asante. Like you put it out, needing more Black teachers or black male teachers besides black female teachers, because most women have done other things like such as the STEM or other career fields or whatever they want to like to do something they're achieve of, but in my own perspective, just because they're black, they um the world has other terms in mind just because they're black, and it's not in a good way. So and as for the young black folks that are listening, how can they handle it? And if they're doing something that they're trying to like passion for, but they get nothing but racial disrespect and discrimination just because they're black, how can they like handle that and have the confidence and the intelligence and the selflessness to like deal with it as they try to like obtain their creativity and artistry and talented and their goals while growing up?
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And I know Richard, he talked about it briefly when he spoke. He mentioned in the beginning that, when you say that you need more male teachers, or you say that you are, advocating for boys and men, it doesn't mean that you are not advocating for women. He's saying that, you can do both things at the same time. We can advocate for men and boys, and at the same time advocate for girls and women at the same time. So just because we're talking about this one doesn't mean that we're not also advocating. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. So I think that's one thing. And then as far as what we can do, I was talking to Professor Ship earlier, and she was talking about how we need more history and study history. One of the things that my parents did well, I think, was to always, it used to be annoying when I was little. Me and my dad would be driving, and everywhere we drive, he'd say, "You see that right there? That was the first, that's where Paul Robeson made it." And he would always be pointing out all these things all over, this is where the first African American wrote. And you're like, why is he, let's just go to the store. He's making everything like a history tour,
But that's the thing.
And my dad's a historian, so it's like, it's his nature. But later on, I started to understand why he was doing that. There's so much. I'll give you an example. I was making this film one time, this film we did, and it was very difficult at the time we were making the film. And I remembered a book my dad had given me a long time ago about Oscar Michaud, the first African-American filmmaker. And you start to think, I'm making a film in the 2000s. I got the internet, I got digital technology, I got all this stuff. And you see, Oscar Michaud was 1925. This guy made 44 films when black people didn't have any rights in this country. This guy wrote the books, funded the film, gave Paul Robeson his debut. One of my dad's people, gave Paul Robeson his debut. So my point is that we can go to that history to get strength, power, and give us that faith. We have it in our history. A lot of times we don't even know the history. That's why it's so great. We celebrate.
And that's the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, we have other people, but thank you so much. That was an excellent question, and really appreciate the question. Thank you.
So we've got two more questions now, looks like.
Hi, my name is Zoe Austin. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm an elementary education major myself. So I wanted to definitely come to this panel because I feel like it was important to understand how, like, as a future educator and as a Black woman, how we can like cater to Black men. And I feel like it was really interesting to see the numbers because when, as a Black woman, you don't always necessarily feel as though things are catered for you. So when you start to see the numbers, you really it was a little bit like mind boggling because it was like, oh wow, like sometimes these opportunities are presented, but like you said, they're not always. Black men at a young age aren't always as going as like Black women are, because I feel like maybe Black women maybe feel like they have to be a little bit farther in life. But my question was, for Professor Asante, being that you were able to go to both schools where they were policing you and then more of like a creative speaker type of, like an open mind, creative free thinking type of place. Do you believe that there is a way that you can like intertwine both ideologies of like policing and also giving students a more of like a free and open mind, like thinking especially for men and specifically Black men, because I know that in a lot of lower income communities that it's a lot harder for people to feel like they don't necessarily need that policing because there is that violence, there is that disparage, like in food deserts in those lower income communities. So sometimes you do need that policing. But how is there a way? Is there a way to like intertwine those two like theories of teaching to make people feel as though
I
they're
love what you're saying. Thank you so much. And my
Thank
mom
you.
was from Brooklyn, so
Oh yay.
I'm right there with you. Bed-Stuy.
Do or die.
Do or
Do or die.
die. So nah, there's always somebody from Brooklyn in the house. You know that. You could be anywhere in the world. I've been all over the world. It'd be, the most be in a village in Malawi and you see somebody from Brooklyn. So there's always people from Brooklyn everywhere. But I think we got to think about that a little bit differently. And what I mean by that is, you used the word, for example, food desert. And I was talking to someone about that recently. They said, no, it's food apartheid. A desert would imply that there's a scarcity or that, this is a natural occurrence. This is not a natural occurrence. This is this is apartheid, with the food supply. So I think it's important to call it what it is. Policing in school, they shouldn't be mixing. There's no, to me, those are not the fact that you have that kind of mentality in a school. First of all, you only see that in schools in our community.
Yeah.
Meaning, you go out to the other school, you don't see the aspect of policing, the criminalization early on. And this comes from the philosophy, the ideology that even Black children and Black boys specifically are not like juveniles in the same way that young white boys might be juveniles, in the sense of, they're just boys being boys or playing. No, a Black boy is 10 years old and he's a criminal. He's a hard, so it's this preparation. And we know even from the data you talked about, we got all these stats and, numbers. And, I remember seeing a chart where they were a company in Pennsylvania, I believe, was using the test scores of elementary school students to project how many prisons they were going to build in the future and to understand that thing. So there's a connection between that policing and the prison industrial company. So I personally, when we're talking about policing, we shouldn't be talking about education in school. There shouldn't be in the same conversation, really. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Julia, a prospective student here and student government president at my high school. While observing the attendance and participation at my current high school, I just had this one question. Why is the definition or appearance of masculinity in schools shifting from the academics to sports?
You think it's more true now than it used to be? Is that your sense of it?
Yes.
It's becoming more like that? Interestingly, actually, the share of boys playing sport is going down in school, partly because we don't have enough coaches, partly because we don't have enough male teachers, who are very often also the coaches. So I don't say that as a good thing, but I do think that's a trend. But it gives me an opportunity, I think, to say something about identity. And I really worry a lot about the way that education and educational success gets coded. And I think you can think about it through kind of racial coding, obviously. And I think a lot of your writing really spoke to that. But I think there's increasingly a sense of it being maybe coded as a bit gendered as well. So you code sports as a thing that guys do and class as a thing that girls do, right? And if you see mostly female teachers, you see the girls doing much better. You don't have the opportunities maybe to kind of move around as much. Maybe the learning's less applied. I love this idea about practicality because it turns out on average, boys need to know a little bit more about why they're learning something before they'll learn it, on average. Then I think it's quite natural that boys might come to the conclusion that this whole school thing seems to be more for girls than for boys. And then there's the alternative is the sports field. And so one of the reasons I'm borderline obsessed with this issue about male teachers, male mentors, male coaches is to try and decode that idea. I really worry you get to a tipping point where the whole idea of thriving at school is coded as feminine. And I think that's a disastrous point to get to. if we get to that point. And so that's why I think it's incredibly important that you have the voices like this.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, one of the things I saw recently is that with so many federal workers losing their jobs, the state of Maryland, among others, is trying to find ways to hire them, and they're inviting some of them to come into the educational system.
That's right. The governor has announced that they're also doing grow your own programs to kind of bring people up through the school system, teacher residency programs, other ways to get more diversity into the teaching workforce. And so I thought that was a really, I mean, obviously you wouldn't necessarily wish that as the reason for it to happen, but I thought that that was a really interesting move by the governor to say that maybe here's an opportunity to get some people into the workforce. And they are being intentional about trying to get more diversity into the teaching workforce. It skews very white and very female right now, the K-12 workforce.
Thank you all very much. I think,
I think he has one more.
oh, sorry.
One more.
He's allowed to sneak in, is he?
Yeah, I snuck in. Good evening, and thank you both for joining us, and certainly enjoyed and found information shared very, very informative and enlightening. I wanted to ask specifically, what impact would you say technology has influenced this chasm and growing trend of male disenchantment and disenfranchisement? Is it technology? Is it lack of socialization? Can you offer some insights in with that regard?
I think we probably would be on the same page to say that it's exacerbating it. I think it's obvious, even when I looked at some of those numbers, you see that shift from 2010. Well, what's the big difference from 2010 to 2022? Well, there's a couple things. One is social media in the way that we know it now. Because, yeah, sure, it started out a little earlier than that, but it wasn't predominant.
Wasn't smartphones.
It wasn't smartphones. That changed everything. That was about 2008, 2009. And then you got COVID, of course, in 2020, which further exacerbates the technology issue and further isolates people. And so I think, we both would probably, I'm just assuming that we might both see those. So I definitely see that in my.
So it's interesting. I think that technology is affecting boys and girls and young men and young women in very different ways. In some ways, in the opposite ways, because for girls, you see this mental health problem, and this is a chance to answer the previous question. There's like two things can be true at once, and so I'm going to tell. There's the question. It's like that. Here's a real issue, which is that for girls, social media is damaging to them precisely because of how social it is. You're sharing images that creates body image problems. You can get relational bullying online. It's very relational. Girls bully just as much as boys. They just tend to do it more relationally than physically, on average. And so social media takes both of those things and makes them much worse for girls. But for boys, it's more anti-social media. It's more isolating. It's more retreat. And if you think about the rise of things like pornography, to some extent gaming, although gaming can also be a way to socialize, so we don't want to be too rigid about that. But I think what's happened is that technology has created a space that men can retreat to, but not the best place to retreat to.
And created an algorithm that if
Pulls
that
them
is
further
what
in.
you're doing,
It pulls them further in.
we can just take you all the way.
Yeah, and so
Yeah.
for me, so so to put a sharper point, that's true. To put a sharper point on it, I think what's happening is that for girls, I really worry about what they're consuming online and like what images and so on. But for boys, it's more like, what are you not doing while you're online, right? It displaces real life stuff, real life relationships, etc., in a way that's damaging. So it's less directly what they're doing online, but it's so tempting. You get pulled in, and before you know, hours have gone by. Some of those hours you should have spent with your friends doing something else, and so it displaces the activity. I want to finish just one story. I'm a bit moved to say this about this whole issue from the question about, like, I'm in case it's not obvious by now, like I'm an upper middle class white British guy, right? Now American guy. My godson is from Baltimore. I come by way, my wife is sitting at the back here. Comes from Baltimore. He's 6'6", so taller than you. And he came to our house once, and he was wearing glasses, reading glasses. And I teased him about it and said, "Oh, you're getting old. Okay, Dwight, you're getting old. You need these glasses now." And he said, "No, the lenses are clear. I don't need them. I just sell more cars to white people when I wear them." And it turns out that's a very well-known thing. Criminal defense lawyers will very often advise their black male clients to put on glasses because it makes them less threatening. And it turns out that if you do the implicit bias test and you look at all that, there is something very specific about the intersection of being black and male that triggers all kinds of responses in people. And one of the ways that black men, including my godson Dwight, have learned is to put the glasses on. So that it looks like he needs his vision corrected. But guess what? It's our vision that needs correcting. And if it's
I like that.
and I think that's
a bar.
And I say that as someone who's only observing this and experiencing it secondhand. But anybody that doesn't think there's a specific issue facing black boys and men in this country is simply blind to the evidence of their own eyes.
Thank you for that.
Excellent.
So we'll return the floor to Dr. Wilson.
Testing. So this has really been an incredibly enlightening conversation this evening. And please join me in thanking both Richard Reeves and MK Asante. Right. I could stay here for another hour listening to this. We've had some incredible presentations on the Presidential Distinguished Speaker Series, but the teaming of the two of you is up there near the top and addressing this topic the way you have addressed it. Richard, you actually shared with us some just unbelievable statistics, the kinds of statistics that we will be looking in a bit more on. And of course, we're going to your website and combing through that and looking at more of that. And of course, we have our co-chairs here who are going to take all that into consideration. And then Professor M.K. Asante with the personal narrative and regaling us with your incredible experiences. I've heard them before, but I am moved every time I hear you talk about the way you grew up. Because as you indicated, of course, I knew your father and extraordinarily well as one of the nation's foremost academics and really followed his work at Temple University. And so as you're talking about what is this like, growing up as a black boy at the time and now men in a very, very upper middle class household, it is shedding some light on the issues that we are trying to tease out as an HBCU. And so we thank you very much. We have a couple of tokens here to present to both of you. And so first of all, I'm going to present this to Professor M.K. Asante. And just one of those, please.
Thank you.
This is going to prevent you having to go to the bookstore. And so we want you to walk around campus and put that on. And all of us can absolutely then conclude that you are just an advanced doctoral student, right? And then to Richard, we know that even though you have that Oxford degree and others that you have kind of woven in and out of institutions to achieve, but when you put on this particular sweatshirt, you can rest assured that you will be wearing the paraphernalia from the best university in the world. And so, our students also have a token to present to you as well. Right. Okay, and here for a picture. Okay, and then let me get in here. We get one more. Okay.
We have shirts in there. Why don't we bring them out?
Okay.
Okay. We're going to send those to you. You want us to get dressed?
You can just hold it up.
How's this?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just gonna grab that shirt there. Just grab it. The student can grab one end. Oh, okay. And Larry, come in here.
Right. Let folks put this way. Good. Good. And one more.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks again. You did a great job.
Yeah, we're gonna
You're not getting a benediction, Dr. Wilson?
watch this film. And he said he would open the studies for homosexual.
Just finished.
So, where did you say you